Hello, and thanks for joining today's webinar. Before I hand over to Don Ayers, PASMA's Technical Director, who's kindly joining us today, there are a couple of housekeeping bits I want to go through to help you to get the most out of this. We also have John Darby from the Test and Research Center, who will talk to us about the importance of certification. Firstly, we will finish with the Q&A. If you have any burning questions about the NBN EN 1004, now's your chance to ask them. Please pop them in the Q&A box. You can do that at any time, and we'll go through as many as possible after the presentation, after which we will stay for a Q&A session. You should find the Q&A box near the bottom of your screen. Try scrolling your mouse over the screen if you can see it, if you can't see it straight away. On your screen, you should see a PowerPoint slide as well as a video box that shows this person speaking at the time, me. So you can resize or move that video to suit your own screen. If you find any of today's information useful, please remember to sign up to our newsletter, which you can do at the end of the presentation. On to the subject at hand, the NBN EN 1004, or more general known as the EN 1004. It's the design standard for mobile access towers and was recently revised to make them even more safe to use. You had until December 2021 to prepare for the change. If you're not sure what you need to do, don't worry, because Don Ayers, your host for today, is not only PASMA's technical director, but also convener of the European Committee responsible for the standard. There's really no one more qualified to talk to you on the subject as he is. He's here today along with our guest speaker, John Darby, and Don will introduce as we get along, to help you navigate these changes wisely. Okay, that's all for me. I'll hand over to Don.
Well, thank you, Willem, and good morning. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, which is intended for safety professionals who have an involvement in the use of mobile tower. So what is NBN EN 1004-1 2020? The purpose of the webinar is to help prepare you for any changes that you need to make as a consequence of the revision of the EN 1004 standard. As convener of CEN TC 53 Working Group 4, with the responsibility of getting consensus on the revision across Europe, it came as rather a surprise that views on mobile towers across Europe were quite different. So one of the main tasks in the revision was to clarify not only some of the requirements, but also the scope of the standard. EN 1004, published in Belgium as NBN EN 1004, is a European standard. EN 1004 has been adopted in some countries outside of Europe. For instance, in South Africa, it's published as SANS 51004. The revised NBN EN 1004 was published in December 2020, replacing the previous version, which was last updated in 2005. The revised version has a new name. It's now NBN EN 1004 Part 1. Why? Because NBN EN 1298, the standard for user manuals for mobile towers, has also been revised and was published as NBN EN 1004 Part 2 in December 2021, replacing the old NBN EN 1298. Also in drafting at the moment is a new standard for towers with a maximum platform height of 2 meters. That standard should be completed and published in about 2 years, and it could become NBN EN 1004 Part 3, or it may have another number. We've transitioned from the old 2000 version of EN 1004. Both the 2005 edition and the new 2020 edition are available and published, although the old version is now listed as superseded. The old version is withdrawn. Manufacturers and suppliers need to supply mobile towers that meet the requirements of NBN EN 1004 Part 1 2020. So what's new in 1004/2020? Previously, the scope of EN 1004 covered towers from 2.5 metres up to 8 metres outdoors and 12 metres indoors. The maximum upper heights have not changed, but the towers now start at ground level. So what does that mean? Designers will now need to consider all of the requirements for EN 1004 towers, including things like stability for towers less than 2.5 metres. So that includes low-level towers, sometimes called room scaffolds. It means that you will now need stabilisers on some of those towers where they were not required previously. Low-level towers can only be safer because of this change. What else is new? The revision confirms the configuration of an EN 1004 tower. They are freestanding. That means they're not tied to another structure for their support. They are single bay structures. They have 4 legs with wheels, so they are mobile. They're intended for temporary works of short duration where they can be taken down at the end of the work shift. If the wind conditions exceed the maximum permitted, then they can be moved indoors out of the wind or quickly dismantled. They must only have one working platform at a time. They're not designed to be used with personal fall arrest, as they have built-in collective protection. And they must be supplied with a built-in means of access to the platform. This now confirms that other configurations of tower, such as non-mobile towers on base plates, link towers, towers with bridges, large deck structures, and towers for longer duration, are outside of the scope of EN 1004. These may be covered in the Codex, which we'll touch upon later during this presentation. The maximum distance between platforms is reduced from 4.2 metres to 2.25 metres. The maximum distance from the ground to the first platform is reduced from 4.6 metres to 3.4 metres. There are new requirements to prevent caster wheels accidentally falling out. Platforms must now be secured at both ends so that they cannot lift up in the wind. And there is additional guidance for designers regarding wind loads in calculations. Different dimensions for side protection will allow for further developments in advanced guardrail systems. And new requirements will allow for alternative means of access below 2 metres. Lots of good things that will help to make mobile towers even safer. But what happens now? Manufacturers should have checked and revised their designs where necessary. And on December 2021, the old version of the EN 1004 standard was withdrawn. You'll probably see new instruction manuals being issued by manufacturers, and you may see changes to towers under 2.5 metres, such as the addition of stabilisers at these lower heights. You may see some new designs for towers under 2 metres with different access methods. Okay, so what do you need to do now? Whilst manufacturers are doing their bit, what do you need to do? There are things that you need to check and things you probably need to put in place. And you can start by checking your current tower safety situation. So number 1, check that you have a purchasing policy that specifies the following. Any new tower equipment you buy is certified to the latest version of EN 1004. So that's NBN EN 1004-1 or Part 1, 2020. Towers in configurations outside of the EN 1004-1 standard should be designed in accordance with Codex Title 5, Book 3. These include towers on base plates, link towers, towers with bridges, and step towers. If you don't have a purchasing policy for tower yet, then write one and circulate it to everyone who needs it. Number 2, things you also need to be checking. Check that any towers that you own are certified to EN 1004. If you have towers which complied with old standards, old national standards, or standards like HD 1004, then we would recommend that you think seriously about replacing them. That's because towers manufactured before EN 1004 may not comply with current standards for strength and stability. They may not have enough components to allow them to be built safely. They may not have dimensions which meet the legal requirements of the KB or Codex. And if that turns out to be the case, then you need to get those towers replaced. If you hire a tower or use contractors, or you're a contractor who uses towers, same thing applies. Make sure that you specify it meets EN 1004 and check that any towers that you hire or that your contractors use are certified to EN 1004, and that you could prove this if required. And we're going to talk more about that later. If you have a tower, but you cannot establish and prove what standard it complies with, well, then unfortunately you need to assume the worst and get it replaced. But you don't need to replace any existing tower that you can show complies with the previous version of EN 1004. You can still use it whilst it's in good condition. So you can still use it whilst it's in good condition if it was certified to the previous version of EN 1004. You don't need to replace any existing tower that you can show complies with that previous version of EN 1004. You can still use it whilst it's in good condition. But when it's worn out or damaged and needs replacing, or if you need to buy additional tower, then you should only buy a tower that complies with the latest EN 1004 Part 1 2020. Where you cannot establish and prove what standard a tower complies with, then as we said previously, it means that you really need to assume that worst and that you need to think about replacing it. You need to be able to show that the tower that you use or that's used in works that you're responsible for is safe work equipment. That's a legal requirement. And one way you can do that is to show that it meets relevant standards. And one way that you can do that is to have copies of certification to those standards. In the Code of Good Practice, there is a reference made to both the Royal Decree of August 2005 as well as the EN 1004 standard. The Royal Decree became part of the Codex Book 4, Title 5 for equipment used when conducting temporary works at heights. Although it's to be read separately from the EN 1004 standard, the parameters for safety requirements are the same as the standard requirements for EN 1004 fully cover the requirements stated in the Codex. The main addition to what is required in the Codex that is not defined by the EN 1004 standard is the explicit need for a competent person, and we'll cover that more a little later. A prerequisite of the Codex is keeping a dossier on hand of the materials used. This includes a user manual certified in accordance with EN 1004 Part 2, the standard for user instructions for mobile towers. And one of the questions we're always getting asked is, what do you mean by certification? And to answer that question, I'm now going to introduce John Darby from the Test and Research Centre. John.
Thanks, Don, for the introduction and the question. To answer that question, let's start by understanding the principles behind product testing and certification. At some point in the development of any product, it will get tested. This ensures that what has been developed actually functions correctly. Products are tested to establish their quality, performance, or reliability before they are put on sale. Testing can also be undertaken after launch to check that nothing has changed and that the product continues to perform as it should do. Under Belgian law, all products placed on the market for temporary work at heights must be safe, Codex Book 4. Many manufacturers, including those of mobile towers, also have their products independently tested. Through independent testing, they can show to their customers the product conforms to standards like NBN EN 1004. This gives confidence to the supply chain and ultimately to the end user that they are using a good quality product. But what if something changes after the testing has been completed? What if the materials used in the product change or the labels are redesigned to save cost and safety critical information removed? Whilst a single product test conducted by a test laboratory can show that the product is compliant to a standard, it only shows that the sample provided was compliant on the day it was tested. And this is where certification comes in. Testing takes a sample product through its paces against the requirements of a standard. Certification, with a big C, extends the same scrutiny to the management of the production process. The International Standards Organization ISO defines certification as the provision by an independent body of written assurance, a certificate, that the product, service, or system in question meets specific requirements. Certification is a process that a product is put through to prove it meets the requirements of a standard. It can also be known as third-party conformity assessment or type approval. Certification is provided by conformity assessment bodies like the Test and Research Centre, working to the international standard ISO 17065. The conformity assessment body will evaluate the product and establish if it is in conformity with the standard. In addition, they will also evaluate the management controls of the product's production. Evaluating the product and the production ensures that the item, as tested today, can be produced to the same design and quality level every time. The purpose of the production audit is to look at how the production is controlled. It looks at the management of the production, including goods inwards control, in-process controls, for example, production to drawings and management of jigs and fixtures, first-off quality assurance, warehouse and stock controls, and design controls, how changes could affect product conformity. If all goes well, the conformity assessment body issues a certificate, and you may also see a certification mark on the product. After certification has been granted, the factory and the product is subject to regular risk-based surveillance audits. This is all about making sure that nothing has changed since the initial assessment. But sometimes products do evolve during their life cycle, and if the product does change or the production process changes, the manufacturer must inform the certification body. The body can then decide what needs to happen for the certification to be maintained. Product certification is not a legal requirement, at least not for the access equipment we're talking about here. However, you would be right to assume that a product placed on the market is safe. European law gives you that right. Producers and importers are responsible for ensuring products are safe under the General Product Safety Directive. But simply relying on a certificate or declaration provided by the manufacturer may not be enough. Sometimes people don't work to the rules or find ways to bend them. Unfortunately, false or fraudulent certificates are all too common, as PPE supplied to Europe during the pandemic showed. It does pay to check. If you are in any doubt, ask for a copy of the certificate and check with the certification body that it is valid. There's an easy way to spot the difference here. If a product has been certified, the certification body may grant a license to use a certification mark. This mark can then be applied by the manufacturer to the product. This shows that to the distributors, regulators, and end users that the product conforms to the relevant standard. Marks like our target mark, BSI's kite mark, or the various TUV marks are examples of these. If you are unsure if the product is certified, look for a certification mark on the product. If one is not evident, ask for a copy of the certificate. The certificate should contain at least the following information: the name and address of the certification body, the date certification is granted, the name and address of the client, the scope of certification, usually EN or ISO standard and the product names, codes or descriptions, the term or expiry date of the certification, if certification expires after an established period, the signature or other defined authorization of the person or persons of the certification body assigned such responsibility. You should also be able to validate the certificate's authenticity by looking at the certification body's website. Most provide a database of certified products that can be searched. The overall aim of certifying products is to give confidence to all interested parties that a product conforms to a standard. Undergoing the conformity assessment process has a number of benefits. It provides consumers and other stakeholders confidence in the product. It gives a company a competitive advantage, and it helps regulators ensure that health, safety, or environmental conditions are being met. In conclusion, the value of certification is the amount of confidence and trust that is created by an impartial and competent conformity assessment conducted by a third party. So, Don, does that in some way go to answer your question?
Thanks, John. Yes, no excuse now for not knowing what certification means, why it's important, and what it looks like. And thank you for joining us today. Whilst we're on the subject of certification, one thing I'd like to warn you about: the types of towers that you might see around, and some of these rarely comply with or are certified to EN 1004. You may see some steel towers like the one in this photograph. These towers are normally galvanized or painted and with an H-shaped frame. They don't meet the requirements of the standard or the codex. They don't come with a safe means of access, stability, or even proper platforms, and they cannot be assembled safely. Again, if you want to know more, then go to the PASMA website, but make sure they're not being used in your organisation or on any of your sites. So that takes us to the question of how you can be certain that a tower meets all of the requirements of EN 1004. Towers which meet only some of the requirements do not comply with the standard. To comply with the standard, you need to meet all of the requirements in their entirety. Once you've ascertained that the tower you use meets all of the requirements of EN 1004, and that you could prove that, then the next thing is to be sure that it's in good condition and fit for use. These towers, which don't meet EN 1004, don't have the side protection to meet the requirements of the standard. They're not supplied with enough platforms. They're not supplied with a means of stability which complies with the standard, and it's almost impossible to build them safely. They're definitely not suitable for the workplace, and in PASMA's opinion, they're not suitable for use in the home either. If you've got one yourself, then you might want to check out our guidance about them on the PASMA website. You certainly need to make sure that they're not being used by anyone in any works that you're responsible for. Now I'm going to hand over to Willem to talk about competency in the use of mobile towers.
Thanks, Don. I now want to cover competence, and in particular competence for safety professionals, managers and supervisors. The Codex is clear on this topic. In Book 5, Article 4.5-7, it states that the employer is to appoint a competent person hereafter, and will ensure that this person is made aware and trained in full to fulfill his appointed tasks. Due to the nature of the EN 1004 Part 1 and EN 1004 Part 2, the manufacturer takes care of a large part of the prerequisites stated in the Codex. Providing training covering the practical and safety aspects of working with towers then covers the rest. So, what do you need to know? A competent person, other than checking your tower equipment situation, the KB, or Royal Decree, or Codex requires the employer to ensure that the user of equipment is competent. What does a competent person at least need to be? Anyone who assembles, inspects, works on or dismantles towers must have up-to-date and adequate training. That applies to each configuration of tower they work with. And if they are building cantilever towers or link towers or whatever configuration, they need to have been trained accordingly. Furthermore, the employer needs to prove that the contents of the course or training is in line with the Royal Decree of 31st of August 2005. Check your system ensures and records that those operatives have the correct accreditation. Competence does not end with a competent person. You also need to be sure that anyone managing or supervising tower operatives or tower operations can also prove their competence. That could be you. That means you can show that the necessary and appropriate competence level for work at height exists throughout your organization. So, let's summarize on the points of today. These are the magic 7 things you need to know and what you need to do now. The NBN EN 1004 is now NBN EN 1004 Part 1 2020. A transition from the previous version ended in December 2021. After that, all towers manufactured and supplied should meet the new standard EN 1004 Part 1 2020 standard. So, update your purchasing policies to make sure that you specify the new standard. Check existing tower equipment complies with EN 1004 standard so you can continue to use the existing equipment if it meets the old EN 1004 standard and if it's in good working condition. If you have a tower that does not comply with EN 1004, you need to replace it or if it's no longer in any form to use. Check the condition of your existing tower, make sure it's in good condition and record your inspections. Don't use any towers that don't meet and are not certified to the standards. And make sure that you and the people working with the towers are competent. And that's it. Thank you. I hope that's been useful. Before we move on to questions, I'd like to thank John Darby from the Test and Research Centre. Thanks, John. Also, Don, thank you for your time and insights. And we've got quite a few ready. I'm going to give people a minute to write their questions, so please keep them coming through. Remember, Don, John and I are still here and happy to answer any EN 1004 related questions you have. And while people are writing their questions, I'll quickly talk about what's on the screen. In the bottom left, there's a link to a published guidance on EN 1004. So visit pasma.co.uk/EN 1004 for a summary of what we've just been discussing. And finally, we've got some contact details on the right for Test and Research Centre, the not-for-profit test facility and certification body for access equipment, where John Darby is now General Manager. If you like videos of dodgy ladders failing testing and getting a peek behind the scenes of what's involved in product certification, I'd highly recommend following Test and Research Centre on LinkedIn as well. I'll pop those links in the chat box so you've got them handy for next time. Well, I think we've crammed in as much as we possibly could. Thanks so much, Don and John, and everyone who attended for making this such a useful session. Thanks for joining us today, and I'll hopefully be seeing you soon in person.